The unforgiving Texas sun beats down on the dusty yard of an industrial scrapyard on the outskirts of Austin, like a hammer on an anvil. In the center of the desolate dirt lot, the massive, grease-stained steel claws of a scrap crusher hover menacingly over a 1983 Silver Eagle tour bus. Its once gleaming paint is faded, the heavy body covered in decades of dust, road grime, and silent memories. Just yards away, two young New York executives, dripping in designer clothes that contrast absurdly with the arid, unforgiving environment, look at their luxury watches with visible impatience. They demand the vehicle be crushed immediately to clear space in the inventory. They see no history in the rusted chrome, only a piece of trash delaying the liquidation of their inheritance. What they fail to notice is the solitary figure leaning against the rusted chain-link fence. He is an older man with an unshakable posture, wearing a straw Stetson pulled low over his eyes and worn, scuffed leather boots that have walked countless miles of dirt roads. He watches in absolute silence. The visual shock lies in the imminent brutality of the industrial machine about to destroy an icon of American music, while the heirs mock the legacy, completely unaware that the living legend himself is standing right there, breathing the dry dust, ready to intervene before the metal is crushed. The air in the Lone Star salvage and auction yard shimmers with the oppressive heat of a 100-degree summer afternoon. The heavy, suffocating scent of diesel fuel, burnt engine oil, and scorched earth dominates the atmosphere, clinging to the skin and burning the back of the throat. It is a vast graveyard of forgotten machines, a place where steel comes to die under the relentless southern sky. Inside the makeshift office, a dilapidated trailer propped up on cinder blocks. The rusted air conditioning unit rattles and wheezes, fighting a losing battle against the heat. Bradley and Jessica stand in the center of the cramped room, radiating annoyance and superiority. They are the sole heirs to the recently deceased Pops Henderson, a man who was once a titan of the Texas music scene, a legendary tour promoter who helped build the foundations of country music in the 80s and 90s. But to Bradley and Jessica, raised in penthouses on the East Coast and educated in elite private schools, their father was nothing more than an eccentric stranger who preferred the company of cowboys and the smell of stale beer in honky-tonks over high society. They had flown down south with one singular cold objective: liquidate everything, turn the old man's lifetime of memories, his collections of vintage guitars, his sprawling ranch, and his fleet of forgotten vehicles into fast, liquid cash. They needed the capital to fund their aggressive tech startups in Manhattan. To them, the legacy of Pops Henderson is nothing but a collection of nostalgic garbage. They have spent the last 3 days tearing through his estate with ruthless efficiency, signing away acres of land and selling off equipment for pennies on the dollar just to be done with it. Now, they stand in the scrapyard, glaring through the dirty window of the trailer at the massive Silver Eagle bus parked in the dirt. The bus is a relic of a bygone era. It is the very vehicle that once crossed the endless highways of the United States, carrying the Ace in the Hole band through sleepless nights, rainstorms, and triumphant arrivals at sold-out arenas. The faded lettering on the side is barely visible under the grime, but for anyone who knows the history of Texas, that bus is a rolling monument. It is a sanctuary where songs that defined a generation were written on the backs of napkins, where guitars were tuned in the dim light of dawn, and where a brotherhood of musicians shared their dreams. But Bradley, sweating through his expensive cold wool suit, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief, sees only a massive hunk of worthless metal taking up space. Jessica, tapping her designer heels against the linoleum floor, complains about the smell of the yard and the incompetence of the locals. They want the bus gone. They want the scrap value, and they want to be on the next first-class flight back to New York. Outside, the yard is quiet except for the distant hum of the highway and the crunch of gravel beneath heavy boots. The older man by the fence stands perfectly still. His presence commands a quiet, unspoken respect, a gravity that seems to anchor the very dust swirling around him. He is the perfect archetype of the stoic cowboy. His face, weathered by years of sun and wind, is deeply lined, telling stories of a life lived fully and honorably. Beneath the brim of his hat, his eyes are sharp and observant, taking in every detail of the scene playing out before him. This is George. He does not wear his fame on his sleeve. He wears a simple pearl-snap shirt, faded blue jeans, and boots that have seen more honest work than the two heirs could ever comprehend. He embodies wisdom, humility, and the deep-rooted Christian values of the Texas Hill Country. He believes in helping his neighbor, in the sanctity of a handshake, and in the quiet dignity of doing the right thing when no one is looking. George had heard the news of Pops Henderson's passing with a heavy heart. Pops was a good man, a loyal friend who had been there in the early days when the crowds were small and the pay was even smaller. When George learned that Pops's children were hastily auctioning off the estate and sending the old Silver Eagle to the scrapyard, he felt a deep pang of sorrow. He knew the history of that bus better than anyone. He had gifted it to his old friend decades ago, a token of gratitude for the unwavering support Pops had shown him. George did not come to the junkyard to cause a scene or throw his weight around. He came as a friend, a man seeking to preserve a piece of history, to rescue the old bus from the jaws of the crusher and give it a dignified resting place on his own ranch. He steps away from the fence, his boots crunching softly against the dry earth. He moves with a slow, deliberate grace, a man who is never in a rush but always arrives exactly when he means to. He approaches the trailer just as Bradley and Jessica step out into the blinding sunlight, followed by the junkyard manager, a hard-working man whose coveralls are stained with years of dark grease. The manager is trying to explain the logistics of moving the massive bus, but Bradley cuts him off with a sharp wave of his hand, demanding action. George stops a few paces away. He tips his hat slightly, a gesture of old-world politeness that seems completely lost on the two executives. He speaks in a voice that is low, steady, and smooth, like the calm before a much-needed rain. He addresses them with a cutting politeness, using the manners he was raised with. "Excuse me, sir. Ma'am, I could not help but overhear your conversation regarding the old Silver Eagle." Bradley turns, looking the older man up and down with an expression of undisguised contempt. He takes in the dusty boots, the worn jeans, and the straw hat, instantly categorizing George as just another local nobody, a relic of a culture he despises. Jessica rolls her eyes, checking her phone and sighing heavily, entirely dismissing the man standing before them. "What do you want?" Bradley asks, his tone sharp and impatient. "We are in the middle of a business transaction here, and we have a flight to catch." George does not react to the disrespect. His expression remains calm, his posture relaxed but unyielding. He reaches into the breast pocket of his shirt and pulls out a folded checkbook. "I understand you are looking to liquidate the estate. That old bus there, it has a lot of sentimental value to me. I knew your father. He was a fine man. I would like to offer you a fair price for the vehicle. I will write you a check right now for more than the scrapyard can give you, and I will have it towed off this lot by sunset. You will not have to lift a finger. It is a generous offer, an easy solution that would put more money in their pockets and save the bus." But Bradley, fueled by the arrogance of a man who believes his wealth makes him superior to everyone around him, scoffs. He looks at the checkbook, then at George, and laughs a dry, mocking laugh. "Sentimental value," Bradley repeats, shaking his head. "You people down here are all the same, clinging to the past, holding on to rusted pieces of junk just because they remind you of the good old days. Listen to me, old man. I do not care about your sentimental value. I do not care about my father's hillbilly friends." George remains silent, his jaw tightening just a fraction. He lets the insult hang in the hot air, refusing to stoop to Bradley's level. He knows that anger is a foolish man's game. He simply waits, offering them the chance to do the right thing. Bradley points a manicured finger at the bus. "Do you know how much paperwork is involved in transferring the title of a commercial vehicle through the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles? It is a nightmare. It takes hours of filling out forms, standing in lines, and dealing with bureaucrats. I do not have the time or the patience for it. Selling it for raw scrap metal requires one signature on a release form. It is clean, it is fast, and it is done. So no, I am not taking your check." "But sir," George says softly, his voice carrying the weight of quiet authority, "it is a piece of history. It would be a shame to see it destroyed just to save a little paperwork. I can handle the title transfer myself. You would only need to sign the bill of sale." "I said no," Bradley snaps, stepping closer to George, trying to use his height to intimidate the older man. But George does not flinch. He stands like an old oak tree, deeply rooted in the Texas soil. Bradley smirks, realizing he cannot intimidate the cowboy, so he resorts to cruelty. He turns to the junkyard manager. "Fire up the crusher. I want that thing flattened right now. I want to watch it happen." The manager hesitates. He is a local man, a man who grew up listening to the radio on the porch with his grandfather. He looks at the bus, then at George, sensing an aura of profound authority radiating from the quiet stranger. There is something familiar about the man's face, something hidden beneath the shadow of the Stetson, but the manager cannot quite place it. He shifts uncomfortably from foot to foot. "Mr. Henderson," the manager says slowly, "the gentleman is offering you good money. It seems like a waste to crush a Silver Eagle. Those chassis are built tough." "I am not paying you to think," Bradley shouts, his face turning red with sudden fury. "I am paying you to destroy that piece of trash. Now do your job, or I will find another scrapyard that will—" The manager sighs, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He nods and signals to the crane operator sitting high up in the glass cabin of the massive industrial machine. The heavy diesel engine of the crane roars to life, sending a thick plume of black smoke into the clear blue sky. The ground vibrates beneath their feet. The noise is deafening, a mechanical scream that shatters the peaceful quiet of the afternoon. The tension in the yard skyrockets. The massive steel claws of the crusher begin to descend, casting a dark, ominous shadow over the faded roof of the Silver Eagle. Bradley crosses his arms, a smug, satisfied smile spreading across his face. He feels powerful. He feels like a king dominating a territory he hates, erasing the last remnants of a father he never respected. He begins to openly insult the culture, his voice raised over the roar of the engine. "Good riddance," Bradley sneers, kicking at the dirt. "I'm so sick of this place, sick of the people who still live in the past, listening to depressing songs about horses, dirt roads, and broken hearts. It is pathetic. It is time to move on and join the real world." George does not raise his voice. He does not need to. His silence is louder than the roaring engine. His eyes, narrowed against the glaring sun, track every movement Bradley makes, absorbing the disrespect, the arrogance, the sheer ignorance of a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. George's heart aches, not for himself, but for Pops Henderson, a man whose legacy is being trampled into the dust by his own flesh and blood. The lowest point comes when the heavy steel claws of the crane finally make contact with the roof of the bus. The sound is agonizing. It is the sound of thick glass shattering into a million pieces, of reinforced steel groaning and tearing under immense pressure. The windows blow out, showering the dirt with glittering shards. The metal roof buckles inward. George takes a single step forward, his jaw clenched tight. Beneath the shadow of his hat, his eyes reflect a deep, sorrowful pain. It seems that a vital piece of American music history, the very sanctuary where he composed some of his first major hits, the rolling home where he shared laughter and tears with his closest friends, will be reduced to a twisted, unrecognizable cube of scrap metal. And it is all happening simply to satisfy the petty, bureaucratic laziness and the staggering arrogance of two city executives who have absolutely no respect for the sweat, the tears, and the calloused hands that built their father's empire. If you also believe that respect for history and hard work is worth more than any bank account, subscribe to the channel right now, because what this suit is about to discover inside that bus will leave his jaw on the floor. The crane operator pulls a heavy lever, and the massive machine groans as it attempts to lift the entire bus off the ground. The claws dig deeper into the sides of the vehicle, ripping through the aluminum siding like paper. The bus shifts, tilting violently to one side. The tires leave the dirt. Bradley laughs, pointing at the destruction, entirely consumed by his own petty victory. Jessica films the spectacle on her phone, already bored, just wanting the metal to fold so they can leave. George watches the tires lift into the air. He knows every inch of that bus. He knows the worn fabric of the seats, the smell of the old wood paneling, the exact spot near the back where the floorboards always creaked. He remembers the cold winter nights, driving through the panhandle, the heater struggling to keep the band warm. He remembers the laughter. He remembers the music. He remembers the day he handed the keys to Pops. It was raining in San Antonio. Pops had tears in his eyes. "You do not have to do this, George," Pops had said. "You earned this, Pops. You believed in me when no one else did," George had replied. That memory flashes before George's eyes as the metal roof caves in. The contrast between the father's gratitude and the son's greed is a bitter pill to swallow. George's hands rest easily at his sides, his thumbs hooked casually into his belt loops. He does not show fear. He does not show panic. He is a man who trusts that the truth always finds its way to the light, even if it has to tear through steel to get there. The crane engine revs higher, black smoke billowing into the sky, blocking out the sun for a brief moment. The shadow falls over Bradley, who is still grinning, completely oblivious to the fact that his arrogant haste is about to trigger a chain of events that will change his life forever. The operator pulls the lever back as far as it will go. The hydraulic pumps whine in protest. The bus is heavy, built like a tank, meant to withstand the rigors of endless touring. The claws are positioned awkwardly, creating immense stress on the center of the frame. Then comes the sound. A deep, resonant boom that vibrates through the soles of their boots. The deep, resonant boom that vibrates through the soles of their boots is not the sound of glass breaking or thin aluminum tearing. It is the agonizing, catastrophic sound of structural steel failing under impossible stress. The Silver Eagle, suspended several feet in the air by the ruthless iron jaws of the crane, begins to groan with a voice that sounds almost human. The heavy chassis, weakened by years of sitting in the damp earth of a forgotten barn before being dragged to this arid wasteland, simply cannot withstand the uneven, crushing pressure applied by the industrial machine. High up in the glass cabin, the crane operator realizes his mistake. He frantically pulls the levers to release the pressure, his grease-stained hands slipping on the controls, but the momentum of destruction has already reached the point of no return. The laws of physics take over. The rear section of the bus, bearing the heaviest weight of the engine block and the reinforced frame, violently twists. A jagged fracture tears across the rusted underbelly. The sound is deafening, a harsh metallic scream that echoes across the sprawling acres of the salvage yard, silencing the distant hum of the highway and scattering a flock of crows that had been resting on a nearby pile of crushed sedans. George does not flinch. His boots remain planted firmly in the dry Texas dirt. His eyes, shielded by the wide brim of his straw Stetson, track the tearing metal with a solemn intensity. He watches as the floorboards of the bus, the very wooden planks he had paced across during countless sleepless nights, trying to find the perfect chord for a new song, splinter and shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces. A massive cloud of red dust, accumulated over decades of traveling down forgotten country roads, explodes outward, momentarily obscuring the sun and casting a hazy, copper-colored filter over the entire yard. Then, from the gaping, violently torn wound in the belly of the old tour bus, something extraordinary happens. A heavy rectangular object, perfectly concealed beneath the false floorboards, breaks free from its hidden moorings. It does not look like a piece of scrap. It does not look like a rusted engine part or a forgotten piece of luggage. It is a massive, reinforced box made of solid, aerospace-grade titanium. It catches the harsh glare of the midday sun, gleaming with an immaculate, pristine silver light that stands in stark, almost holy contrast to the rust, decay, and ruin surrounding it. The box plummets toward the earth, heavy and undeniable. It hits the hard-packed dirt with a thunderous, bone-rattling thud that sends a shockwave through the ground. The impact is so severe that the heavy latches on the front of the titanium vault, designed to withstand fire, water, and the ravages of time, finally give way under the extreme kinetic force. The heavy lid pops open just a fraction, releasing a faint hiss of pressurized, climate-controlled air that had been sealed inside for decades. The crane operator, pale and trembling, immediately kills the engine of his machine. The massive diesel motor sputters and dies, plunging the junkyard into a sudden, ringing silence. The only sound left is the soft hissing of the hydraulic lines and the dry wind sweeping across the desolate yard. The operator lowers the mangled remains of the Silver Eagle to the ground with a sickening crunch, stepping back from the controls as if the machine had burned him. Bradley and Jessica stand frozen in their tracks, their faces pale beneath their expensive sunglasses. The cloud of red dust washes over them, coating Bradley's Italian wool suit and Jessica's designer silk blouse in a fine layer of gritty dirt. Normally, Bradley would be screaming about the dry cleaning bill, throwing a tantrum about the incompetence of the local workers. But he does not make a sound. His eyes are locked onto the gleaming titanium box resting in the dirt. Even through his profound ignorance of country music and Texas history, the sheer quality and weight of the vault trigger the primal, predatory instincts of a Wall Street opportunist. He knows instantly that something hidden with such extreme care and expense is not garbage. Coughing and waving the dust away from his face, Bradley steps forward. The heat radiating from the baked earth is oppressive, but a cold sweat breaks out on the back of his neck. Jessica follows close behind, her high heels sinking into the loose dirt, complaining softly about the smell, but equally drawn by the magnetic pull of the mysterious vault. George remains exactly where he is, leaning slightly against his own quiet strength. He knows exactly what is in that box. He had watched Pops Henderson install that false floorboard with his own 2 hands on a humid night in San Antonio, swearing an oath of absolute secrecy. Pops had looked him in the eye and said that a man's legacy needed a safe harbor, a place where the vultures could not pick it apart. George feels a heavy, sorrowful tightness in his chest. The sanctuary has been breached. The private history of his youth, the sacred artifacts of his journey, are about to be exposed to the greedy, uncalloused hands of a man who despises everything they represent. Bradley reaches the box. He drops to his knees in the dirt, completely ignoring the ruin of his tailored trousers. He grabs the heavy titanium lid with both hands and, with a grunt of exertion, heaves it open the rest of the way. The heavy lid falls back into the dirt, exposing the meticulously preserved interior. The box is lined with thick, custom-molded velvet, completely untouched by the dust, the moisture, or the relentless Texas heat. The smell that rises from the vault is not the stench of decay. It is the rich, intoxicating aroma of aged mahogany, old leather, and the faint, ghostly scent of pipe tobacco. It is the smell of history. Bradley stares into the box, his breath catching in his throat. Jessica leans over his shoulder, her eyes widening behind her oversized sunglasses. Nestled perfectly in the center of the velvet lining rests an acoustic guitar. But it is not just any guitar, it is a vintage Martin, its spruce top aged to a deep, golden honey color. The wood is scarred and worn in very specific places, telling the story of a man who played it with relentless passion. The fretboard is deeply grooved from years of calloused fingers pressing down on the steel strings. It is the very guitar that a young, unknown cowboy had used to write songs in the back of smoky dive bars, the instrument that had birthed melodies that would eventually echo across the entire world. It was a guitar that had been reported lost in the late 80s, a mythical artifact whispered about by collectors and historians. Surrounding the guitar are several thick, hand-tooled leather notebooks. Their pages are slightly yellowed at the edges. Next to the notebooks sit heavy silver canisters containing reel-to-reel master tapes, the labels written in a neat cursive hand, detailing studio sessions that had never seen the light of day. Unreleased tracks, raw acoustic cuts, the holy grail of a musical empire. Bradley's hands are shaking. He reaches out, his fingers trembling with a sudden, overwhelming surge of adrenaline. He does not touch the guitar with reverence. He touches it with the calculating, cold grip of an appraiser. He lifts the vintage Martin from its velvet bed, holding it up to the harsh sunlight. He knows nothing about the soul of the instrument, nothing about the blood and sweat poured into the wood, but he knows the vintage market. He knows the logo on the headstock. "Oh my God," Jessica whispers, pulling down her sunglasses. "Bradley, is that what I think it is? That's what I think?" Bradley's face twists into a manic, predatory smile. The annoyance and frustration that had plagued him all morning completely vanish, replaced by a euphoric, unadulterated greed. "It is a gold mine," Bradley breathes, his voice tight with excitement. He carefully sets the guitar back down and snatches one of the leather notebooks. He flips it open. The pages are filled with handwritten lyrics, scribbled notes, and chord progressions. He recognizes the titles. Even someone who hates country music knows the anthems that define the genre, the songs that play in every stadium, every rodeo, every jukebox from coast to coast. These are the original handwritten drafts, the genesis of a legend. Do you have any idea what this is worth? Bradley asks, looking up at his sister, his eyes wide and wild. He drops the notebook back into the box and pulls out his expensive smartphone, his thumbs flying across the screen as he opens his contacts. Sotheby's, Christie's, Heritage Auctions. I need to make a call right now. We are talking millions, Jessica. Millions of dollars sitting in the dirt. Dad was a crazy old fool, but he was hoarding a fortune in this rusted piece of junk. The junkyard manager takes a slow, hesitant step forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. He recognizes the guitar. He recognizes the handwriting on the tape canisters. He looks from the titanium box to the quiet older man standing a few yards away, and suddenly the pieces begin to fall into place. The manager's breath hitches. He takes a step back, suddenly terrified by the gravity of the situation, realizing that he is standing in the presence of royalty. He looks at George, but George gives him a microscopic shake of the head, a silent command to remain still. The manager swallows hard and freezes, the clipboard shaking in his greasy hands. Bradley, completely consumed by his own triumph, stands up. He brushes the dirt from his ruined suit with quick, aggressive slaps. He feels invincible. He feels that he has finally conquered the miserable, dusty world his father loved so much. He turns his attention back to the old cowboy standing near the trailer. Bradley's smile is cruel, dripping with condescension and arrogant victory. He walks a few paces toward George, pointing a finger at the open vault. "Well, well, well," Bradley sneers, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet yard. "It looks like your little sentimental attachment was just a pathetic attempt to con us. You knew this was in there, didn't you, old man? You knew my father had a fortune hidden in the floorboards, and you thought you could slide in here with your polite little act and buy the whole bus for the price of scrap metal. You thought you could steal from us." George does not react to the accusation. His face remains a mask of calm, stoic endurance. The wind kicks up, rustling the brim of his hat and blowing a fine mist of red dust across the yard. He looks at Bradley, really looks at him, seeing the emptiness behind the expensive clothes and the loud voice. He sees a boy who never learned the value of a hard day's work, a boy who measures a man's worth by the balance of his bank account. "I offered you a fair price for the bus, sir," George says, his voice as smooth and steady as a slow-moving river. "I told you it held sentimental value. I never lied to you." "Sentimental value," Bradley mocks, throwing his head back and laughing loudly. He turns to Jessica. "Did you hear that? The old cowboy is still playing dumb." He looks back at George, his eyes narrowing with vicious delight. "Let me explain how the real world works, Grandpa. You tried to pull a fast one and you failed. You are standing on my property. That bus belongs to my father's estate, which means it belongs to me. And everything inside that hidden little vault is now the legal property of my corporation." Jessica steps up beside her brother, crossing her arms, a smug smile playing on her lips. "We are going to put all of this in a glass case in New York and auction it off to the highest bidder. Maybe some billionaire in Dubai will buy that old guitar to hang in his bathroom. It does not matter to us. What matters is that you get off our property right now, before I call the sheriff and have you arrested for trespassing and attempted fraud." George takes a slow, deep breath. The smell of the dry earth fills his lungs. He remembers a time when a man's word was his bond, when a handshake meant more than 100 pages of legal contracts. He remembers Pops Henderson, a man who would have given the shirt off his back to a stranger in need. To see Pops's children behaving with such venomous greed is a tragedy that cuts deeper than any insult Bradley could throw at him. But George is not a man who acts on anger. He operates on principle. He knows that the truth is a heavy hammer, and it only needs to swing once. "Are you absolutely certain you want to handle things this way, son?" George asks quietly. His voice carries a subtle warning, a deep resonance that makes the junkyard manager shiver despite the blistering heat. "I am giving you one last opportunity to walk away from this with your dignity intact. You can close that box, hand it over, and we can pretend this ugly conversation never happened." Bradley scoffs, stepping aggressively into George's personal space, trying to stare him down. "Dignity? You want to talk to me about dignity? You are a washed-up, dirt-poor farmer trying to steal millions of dollars from a grieving family. I am not handing you anything except a warning. Get out of my sight. You lost. The treasure is ours." George holds Bradley's gaze for a long, silent moment. The air between them feels charged, heavy with the impending storm. George's eyes, calm and ancient, reflect a profound pity for the man standing in front of him. Bradley turns his back on George, dismissing him completely. He walks back to the titanium box, kneeling down again to admire his newfound wealth. He reaches past the vintage Martin guitar, past the leather notebooks filled with priceless history, and digs his hands deeper into the velvet lining, searching for any other hidden valuables. His fingers brush against something flat and smooth, resting at the very bottom of the vault. Bradley pulls it out. It is a heavy brown manila envelope, sealed with red wax. The paper is thick and slightly stiff from age. Across the front of the envelope, written in bold black ink, are the words, "To be opened only in the event of liquidation." Bradley's eyes light up. He assumes it is stock certificates. He assumes it is the deed to a hidden ranch, or perhaps the account numbers to offshore bank accounts. His greed blinds him to any other possibility. He rips the envelope open with savage impatience, tearing the thick paper and breaking the red wax seal. He pulls out a thick stack of legal documents, bound by a heavy brass clip. The paper bears the official seal of the state of Texas and the stamp of a prominent San Antonio notary public. Jessica leans in close, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. "What is it, Brad? Is it the deed to the ranch?" Bradley does not answer immediately. He flips to the first page, his eyes darting back and forth across the typed words. He reads the preamble. He reads the names involved. As his eyes move down the page, the triumphant, mocking smile slowly begins to slide off his face. The color drains from his cheeks, leaving him looking pale and sickly under the harsh sun. His hands, which had been so steady and confident just moments before, begin to tremble violently. The legal documents rustle in the dry wind. He reads the specific clause highlighted in bold, undeniable ink. He reads the conditions of the gift. He reads the absolute, ironclad legal framework that Pops Henderson had insisted upon to protect his friend's legacy from exactly this kind of situation. Bradley stops breathing. His heart hammers against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looks up from the papers, his eyes wide with a sudden suffocating terror. He looks at the vintage guitar. He looks at the handwritten lyrics. And then, slowly, agonizingly, he turns his head to look at the quiet older man standing in the dust. The man who had offered him a fair price. The man who had asked him not to crush the bus. The man he had just insulted, mocked, and threatened to have arrested. George reaches up with a slow, deliberate motion. He takes hold of the dark sunglasses resting on the bridge of his nose and pulls them off. He reaches for the brim of his straw Stetson and tilts it back, allowing the harsh Texas sunlight to fully illuminate his face for the first time. The harsh Texas sunlight hits George's face, illuminating the familiar, deeply etched lines of a man who has spent a lifetime under the spotlight and under the open sky. The junkyard manager lets out a sharp, audible gasp, the heavy metal clipboard slipping from his slick fingers and hitting the dirt with a loud clatter. He stumbles backward, his grease-stained hands flying to his mouth, eyes wide with absolute starstruck terror. He is not just looking at a local rancher. He is looking at the king of country music. He is looking at the man whose voice has soundtracked every major moment of his life, from his first dance at his wedding to the quiet, lonely drives down empty highways. Bradley remains frozen on his knees in the dirt, the thick stack of legal documents trembling in his hands. The blood has completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost trapped in an expensive Italian suit. Jessica, sensing the sudden, catastrophic shift in the atmosphere, snatches the papers from her brother's limp grip. Her eyes frantically scan the dense legal text, searching for a loophole, searching for a mistake. But the words are absolute and unforgiving. The document is a masterclass in airtight legal drafting, signed, sealed, and notarized in 1985. It clearly states that the 1983 Silver Eagle tour bus, bearing the specified vehicle identification number, was transferred to the care of Pops Henderson as a conditional gift. The The condition was singular and unbreakable. The bus, and specifically the hidden titanium compartment and its entire contents, were to remain the lifelong, inalienable property of George Harvey Straight. The document explicitly dictates that if Pops Henderson were to pass away, and if his heirs attempted to sell, scrap, or otherwise dispose of the vehicle, the legal ownership of the bus and every single item inside it would immediately and automatically revert back to its original owner. There is no ambiguity. There is no room for negotiation. The trap Pops Henderson had built to protect his friend's legacy has sprung shut with devastating precision. George does not gloat. He does not smile. Nor does he raise his voice to demand an apology. He simply walks forward, his boots crunching softly against the gravel and broken glass. He moves with the calm, unstoppable momentum of a slow-moving freight train. He stops right in front of Bradley, towering over the kneeling executive. The shadow of George's Stetson falls over Bradley's pale, terrified face. "I believe you are holding my property, son," George says. His voice is incredibly quiet, yet it carries the weight of a thunderclap. It is the voice of a man who knows exactly who he is, a man who does not need to shout to command absolute authority. Bradley opens his mouth to speak, but no words come out. His throat is dry, his mind racing to comprehend the sheer magnitude of his catastrophic mistake. He has just spent the last 20 minutes aggressively insulting, mocking, and threatening to arrest a man who could buy his entire Manhattan startup with the change in his pocket, a man who is revered as a living deity in the state of Texas. He looks at the vintage Martin guitar resting in the velvet lining, realizing with sickening clarity that the instrument does not belong to a dead man. It belongs to the legend standing right in front of him. Jessica, desperate and panicking, tries to salvage the situation. She forces a trembling, entirely unconvincing smile, her voice pitching up nervously. "Mr. Straight," she stammers, stepping forward and holding out the legal papers like a shield. We had no idea. We apologize. We were just trying to handle our father's estate, and it has been very stressful. If we had known it was you, we never would have." George turns his gaze to Jessica. His eyes are not angry, but they are cold and unyielding, stripping away her false, polite facade. "If you had known it was me, ma'am, you would have treated me differently," George says softly, stating a fact rather than asking a question. "That is exactly the problem. You thought I was just an old farmer with dirt on my boots. You thought that gave you the right to treat me like garbage. You thought that gave you the right to destroy a piece of history just because filling out the paperwork was too much trouble for you." Jessica shrinks back, the false smile vanishing from her face. She looks down at the dirt, unable to meet his eyes. George reaches down and gently takes the stack of legal documents from her trembling hands. He folds them neatly and slides them back into the breast pocket of his pearl-snap shirt. He then turns his attention back to the titanium vault. He kneels down smoothly, his joints popping slightly, completely ignoring the dust getting on his jeans. He reaches into the box and carefully lifts the vintage Martin guitar. He holds it with a reverence that borders on the sacred, his large, calloused hands tracing the familiar grooves on the fretboard. He closes his eyes for a brief second, the memories of 1,000 smoky stages and endless highway miles rushing back to him in a silent wave. He stands up, holding the guitar by the neck, and looks down at Bradley, who is still kneeling in the dirt, completely defeated. "Your father was a good man," George says, his voice softening just a fraction, carrying a profound sadness. He understood that some things are worth more than money. He understood respect. He understood loyalty. It breaks my heart to see that he could not pass those values down to his own children. You came down here to sell off his life, to turn his memories into cash, and you did not even have the decency to respect the ground you are standing on. Bradley looks up, his eyes wide and pleading. "Mr. Straight, please, we can work this out. We can pay for the damages to the bus. We can—" "You cannot buy your way out of this, son," George interrupts, his tone final and absolute. "The deal is done. The bus is mine. The contents are mine. You have absolutely no claim to any of this." George turns away from the heirs, dismissing them entirely, as if they are no longer worth his time or breath. He looks over at the junkyard manager, who is still standing frozen by the trailer, sweating profusely and clutching his chest. "Sir," George calls out, his voice returning to its polite, easy drawl, "I apologize for the commotion. I know you were just doing your job." The manager snaps to attention, wiping his greasy hands frantically on his coveralls. "Mr. Strait'S, sir, I am so sorry. I swear to God, if I had known it was your bus, I would have never let that machine touch it. I would have quit my job first. I am so sorry." "There is no need to apologize, friend," George says kindly. "I need a favor. I need this bus towed to my ranch down in Cotulla. I know the frame is busted, but I want it moved carefully. I will pay whatever your premium rate is, and I will cover the cost of a flatbed if that is what it takes." The manager shakes his head vigorously, his eyes wide. "No, sir, absolutely not. You do not pay a dime. I will fire up the heavy wrecker right now myself. I will strap it down like it is made of glass, and I will drive it to your front gate personally. It is an honor, Mr. Straight. It is a genuine honor." "I appreciate that," George says, tipping his hat to the man. "Send the bill to my office anyway. A man deserves to be paid for his honest work." George walks back to the titanium vault. He carefully places the vintage Martin guitar back into its velvet bed, making sure the neck is supported perfectly. He closes the heavy titanium lid, the thick metal sealing with a satisfying, airtight click. He grips the heavy handles on the side of the box, testing the weight. It is heavy, but he is a man who has spent his life working with his hands. He lifts the vault, his broad shoulders straining slightly against the weight, and begins to walk slowly toward his pickup truck parked just outside the junkyard gates. He does not look back. He does not need to. Bradley and Jessica are left entirely alone in the center of the dusty yard, surrounded by the wreckage of their own arrogance. The crushed, mangled frame of the Silver Eagle looms over them like a monument to their failure. They had come to Texas to liquidate an empire, to show the locals how business is done in the big city. Instead, they have been utterly humiliated, stripped of millions of dollars in priceless historical artifacts, and taught a brutal, unforgettable lesson about respect by the very man they had tried to step on. Bradley slowly gets to his feet. His expensive Italian suit is ruined, covered in red dirt, grease, and sweat. He looks at his sister, who is staring blankly at the ground. They have nothing to say. The silence of the salvage yard presses down on them, heavier than the Texas heat. They walk slowly toward their luxury rental car, their heads bowed, the crushing weight of their mistake settling deep into their bones. They realize, perhaps for the first time in their privileged lives, that the real world does not bow to the arrogance of Wall Street, and that true power does not reside in a bank account, but in the quiet, unshakable dignity of a man who knows exactly what he stands for. The dust begins to settle in the Lone Star salvage yard. The heavy wrecker engine roars to life, preparing to carefully lift the broken remains of the Silver Eagle and carry it home. The old bus will never drive down the highway again, but it will not be crushed into an anonymous cube of scrap metal. It will be restored. It will be placed in a museum, its scars and dents preserved as a testament to the miles it traveled and the music it helped create. The titanium vault will sit beside it, open for the world to see, protecting the handwritten lyrics and the scarred wooden guitar that changed the landscape of American music. George Strait drives his pickup truck down the long, dusty farm road, the heavy titanium box resting securely in the bed. The sun begins to set, casting a warm, golden light over the endless expanse of the Texas hill country. He rolls the window down, letting the cool evening air rush into the cab. He smells the dry earth, the sweet scent of mesquite wood, and the faint promise of rain on the horizon. He reaches out and turns on the radio. A familiar pedal steel guitar whines through the speakers, followed by a steady, comforting drumbeat. He rests his arm on the open window, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, a quiet sense of peace settling over his heart. He has protected his history. He has honored his friend. He has proven once again that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the strongest, and that a quiet man with dirt on his boots and truth in his heart will always stand taller than a giant built on lies and greed.